everybody. It's my pleasure and my honor to welcome you to the 5th Annual Specialty Coffee Symposium. Now, it's my job here this morning to give you a little guide to what we've got planned for you the next couple of days. But I want to begin at the beginning, as I tend to do when I give a talk. And in this case, the beginning of Symposium was with the ancient Greeks. Here is a piece of pottery from about 400 BC depicting a Greek symposium. This depicts Greeks sitting around, drinking and talking, which is what the symposium was all about. Symposium is a Greek word that comes in 3 parts. Sym, meaning together, pos, meaning drink, and ium, meaning a place or a setting. What the Greeks did at the symposium was sit around and drink together. And this being Greece, what they were drinking was wine. Now, this was a problem for the Greek symposium. So in this engraving, if you look closely, what we've got to your left is a Greek statesman who's drunk a little too much wine, he's lost track of his clothes, and he's dancing around with a wreath. And this was commonplace at the Greek symposium. So though they laid the foundations for modern philosophy at these Greek symposia, Plato and Aristotle, there was a limit to what they could accomplish on account of the wine. Good thing for us, about 1,000 miles south and about 1,000 years later, the Ethiopians made an important discovery, and that was the discovery of coffee. They also figured out how to prepare and drink it, and they started having their own kind of symposium, this time a coffee symposium. And if any of you know anything about the Ethiopian coffee ceremony, you'll recognize that the important characteristic of the Ethiopian coffee drinking ritual is togetherness. The idea of social interaction, about exchanging information over cups of coffee. This is a common scene in an Ethiopian coffee ceremony where people make connections, exchange information, and develop their community. So as coffee moved from Ethiopia across the Red Sea to Yemen and to Arabia, lots of things changed about the coffee ritual, but one thing stayed central, which is the connection, the idea of exchange of information, the social exchange that happened at what were now called coffee houses. In fact, so much so that they became places of political development. For a time, coffee houses were actually outlawed in Mecca because they were thought of as centers for political sedition. Coffee moved from Yemen and Arabia into Europe. And now look at this image. This is an image of a coffee house in Enlightenment Europe. And you'll see that people are sitting around a table exchanging views. This is characteristic of every image we see of coffee from this time, people interacting with each other. Now, around the time that coffee got introduced to Europe, things started to happen. And it's a period we now know as the Age of Enlightenment, where huge developments in science and political thought and philosophy happened. I'm not the first one to speculate that there was a connection with coffee somehow. Some say it's because they stopped drinking beer all the time and started drinking coffee or whatever. Rapid developments in culture started to happen. As coffee drinking went on in Europe, the coffee house took on an even more important characteristic. This is an image from Lloyd's Coffee House in London. And in the front of Lloyd's Coffee House, there was an area called the subscription room. And the subscription room is sometimes called the internet of the Enlightenment era because it was a place that you could go get information, shipping news, newspaper subscriptions, all happened in this room. If you needed information, you went to Lloyd's Coffee House to get it. So now we've got a commercial aspect to this level of connectivity. And finally, as coffee moved here to the New World, of course, coffee houses took on another important characteristic. The very first coffee houses in the United States were just a few miles from where we're standing right now, here in Boston. But the most famous Boston coffee house was this one. It's called the Green Dragon, and it was known as the headquarters of the Revolution. So the new political thought of this new experimental country that's come to be called the United States was planned in a coffee house just a couple of miles from here. So what is this about coffee that makes us want to get together and interact with each other and hatch ideas and debate and interact with each other? I was really curious about this, and so I reached out to my local university and the Department of Psychiatry. And let me tell you what I found. I'll show you a video. Okay, So, could you introduce yourself?
Sure.
And,
My name is Dr. Martin Paulus. I'm a professor of psychiatry at the University of California, San Diego. My specialty is looking at brain systems, but I've also done a lot of studies using functional magnetic resonance imaging, trying to unravel how certain drugs work in the brain, how certain chemicals work in the brain.
And I think you must be a coffee drinker yourself.
I am, yes.
You've got 2 coffee machines on your desk.
I know, yes. So caffeine has actually a complex effect on the brain. The most obvious one is it affects blood flow. It can open up certain vessels that more blood flows through brain areas. The more specific effects of caffeine are during certain types of tasks. So for example, we have looked at it during emotion and doing what's called executive functioning tasks. And then another group here at UCSD that is led by Tom Liu has looked at this during what's called resting state, when a person is simply in an MRI and you're taking a picture of the brain and you look at how does the brain organizes itself during the resting state, when you're basically not thinking of anything particular or you're not asked to do anything in particular. And the results are interesting. We found surprisingly not a great deal of change in the brain during specific tasks. But what Tom found is that the way different parts of the brain interact changes, and changes pretty significantly, in that and that has implications as to, for example, when you process information, you're taking information from different parts of the brain. And what he found is that the degree of connectivity between different parts of the brain really changes with caffeine. You can think of the brain as a sort of a symphony orchestra, right, with different parts of it. And at any given point in time, you're playing a piece of music that is reflected in different parts of the orchestra. But at some points in time, the orchestra really works together as a single unit. And, of course, that changes, that goes back and forth. And it's very similar to the brain, where sometimes the brain works together as a unit, and sometimes the kind of different parts of the brain do different things. I think that the notion here is that maybe what caffeine is doing is creating these moments of connectivity, where you can actually have these different parts of the brain come together. As a natural plant, coffee has other components, other micronutrients. Among those are flavonoids. There's a number of animal studies that have looked at various types of flavonoids and have found that, that certain types of flavonoids have anti-anxiety properties. There are even two human studies that have shown similar effects. What coffee does, it changes the brain state in such a way that you want to A, process information, and B, share that processed information with other people. And we actually, again, these would be studies that we would need to do, but I would speculate that areas that are important for social interaction in the brain are definitely affected by coffee. I would venture to guess that there are certain that people under the influences of coffee in general will have specific brain areas that under certain circumstances, information processing circumstances, are processing more than when they don't have coffee.
All right, so what you heard Dr. Paulus say was that coffee may have an effect in the brain of making your brain connect with itself better. He also speculated that coffee might have this function of making us connect with each other better. And all this talk about connections makes me think about my hero, Buckminster Fuller. Now, Buckminster Fuller's most famous invention is the geodesic dome, which is a structure that's really known for its immense strength. And the secret to a geodesic dome's strength is in its structure. If you look at it from beneath, you see that what this thing is just a series of points that's connected to a bunch of other points. And it's these connections that give this dome its strength. Now look at this image. This is an image that is meant to represent what's called a neural web. This is the way that your neurons are connected in your brain. So each neuron is connected to many other neurons in a web. And this structure has fascinated computational scientists, and they've started to build computational models on a neural web, where computers are built to connect with many other computers in a web-like interface. One of the foremost scientists of this is Dr. Ralph Abraham. He's a mathematician who studies these neural webs. And what he said when asked about neural net technology, the use of neural webs in technology, is this: we now know from neural net technology that when there are more connections between points in a system, and there is greater strength between those connections, there will be sudden leaps of intelligence. Okay? Sudden leaps of intelligence. So, to summarize, what we have is that coffee equals connection. Coffee drives us to connect with each other. And also, connection equals intelligence. So, is it any surprise that the coffee houses of ancient Arabia led to huge political developments there? Or that the coffee houses of Europe led to the Enlightenment? Or the coffee houses of America were centers of political exchange and development? And what's possible in the modern coffee house and the connections that we make there? But of course, we're not limited to the local effect of coffee just in our brain or in our local coffee house. We now live in a global world. Those of us that are here in this room together represent the entire world. And what's possible when we start to make those connections between each other? And what leaps of intelligence can happen when we enforce those connections? And that's exactly what we're doing here at the Specialty Coffee Symposium. We're here as different points in the system of specialty coffee, and we're here to try to connect with one another. And these connections that we make with one another make us stronger, make us more intelligent, and drive us into the future. And what could happen if into this web we put important information that we can process together as an intellectual body? This is the spirit that drives us at the Specialty Coffee Symposium and what we seek to achieve today. So I want you to remember that today is about making those connections. Of course, the thing that we all came for is the talks that we have planned, but the thing that's important, that can't be replaced anywhere else, is this idea of connectivity. Thank you.